Frankie Lymon was a talented American doo-wop rock and roll singer, best known for his hit song Why Do Fools Fall in Love. Also in 1998, there was a film by the name of Why Do Fools Fall in Love, starring Larenz Tate. And what I want to do through February is any actor that played a role for someone's biopic, give a little bit of history about that actual person and do a compare and contrast on the actual life and what was a little bit different throughout the movie. And of course, today, February 1st, we're starting with Frankie Lymon. Frankie Lymon was born in Washington Heights, New York City, September 30th, 1942. His parents were Jeanette and Howard, who worked very hard, with his father being a truck driver and his mother was a maid. His parents were also in a gospel group called the Harlem Airs. Now, Frankie and his brothers, they had their own little group, and it was the Harlem Air Juniors. Life wasn't always easy for Frankie and his family, so this was what forced Frankie Lymon to get a job at a grocery store at just 10 years old. Music had always been in Frankie's blood, and at 12 years old, he went to a talent show and he seen a doo-wop group by the name of Coupe de Villes. He ended up becoming friends with the lead singer, Herman Santiago, and they eventually formed a group with three other members. They went through a few name changes, but then they settled on the Teenagers. The Teenagers used to practice their songs on the corners in their neighborhood, and being that a majority of them lived on the same block, when it was cold outside, they would go inside of buildings and do a little bit of singing. One day, there was a neighbor that heard the boys singing within the hallways, and they ended up giving the group a stack of love letters. And out of these love letters is where the song, Why Do Fools Fall in Love, came about. They took the words out of the letters and they rewrote it, and then Why Do Fools Fall in Love came from a letter that a neighbor gave them. The lucky break came for the Teenagers when they impressed a guy by the name of Richard Barrett, who was a singer in a group called the Valentines. He helped them actually get an audition with a legendary producer, George Goldner. And from there on, a big day came when the lead singer, Santiago, was late to their audition. From there, Frankie Lymon, he stepped up and he told Goldner he knew the song because he actually helped write it. And from there, the rest is history. Frankie Lymon's unique voice put him in front of the group, and then they became known as Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers. Recording the hit single Why Do Fools Fall in Love, the Teenagers eventually get signed to Goldner and G Records, and they burst onto the scene in January of 1956. Why Do Fools Fall in Love, the single shot up the charts, reaching number 6 on the Billboard Pop chart and topping the R&B charts for over 5 weeks straight. From here, one hit led to another. I Want You to Be My Girl became their second biggest pop hit, and this reached number 13. They had a string of R&B hits from there with I Promise to Remember, Who Can Explain, and the ABCs of Love, and they all charted on the Billboard charts.
Why do fools fall in love? Why do birds sing so gay?
Interesting fact, their first album was actually called The Teenagers featuring Frankie Lymon, but we've all known it as Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers. With all of the hits that the Teenagers had, they ended up going on a tour in Europe. Now, this is in early 1957, and what Goldner seen was that everyone started to flock to Frankie Lymon because of his unique voice, and while they were actually on tour in Europe, they got shown a lot of love, but this is where we started to see Frankie Lymon break off and become Frankie Lymon, his own entity, and have a solo career. Frankie was so good, they even gave him solo spots during their shows with pre-recorded background, so none of the other members would be out there and it's just Frankie. The final single that the group put together was Goody Goody, and it was actually a solo recording by Frankie Lymon. Even though it still said Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers on the label, it was really just Frankie, and you see him out there, Goody Goody.
Oh, you met someone who set you back on your heels. Goody, goody.
By September 1957, Frankie was officially out of the group, and as a solo artist, things weren't going how he initially thought they would. Frankie was getting older and his voice started to change. He moved to a new record label, and then there was a major incident that happened on live TV where Frankie Lymon actually danced with a white girl, and that right there upset a lot of people, and this actually pushed Frankie a little bit out of the limelight, because you got to remember the times we were in, and this wasn't good at all. Frankie Lymon was drafted into the U.S. Army. Instead of going to jail for being arrested on using heroin in 1966, he chose to serve in the Army and used that as military time. He was sent to Fort Gordon in Georgia for basic training. Unfortunately, things didn't go smoothly for Frankie. He faced disciplinary issues, even went AWOL to perform at small clubs throughout the South to make some money to also contribute to his habit. This pattern of misconduct continued, and ultimately he received a less than honorable discharge from the Army in December of 1967. Frankie's life unfortunately was cut short at the age of 25 on February 27, 1968. He was found in his grandmother's bathroom in New York City. Frankie Lymon's death was attributed to a heroin overdose. This was a heartbreaking ending to a promising career, and it really did shock the music world and served as a stark reminder of the dangers of a drug addiction. Why Do Fools Fall in Love came out in 1998, starring Larenz Tate, and it was a story about Frankie Lymon's rise through his musical career and also his struggles. But a central theme of the film was Lymon's actual love life. And the movie explores his relationship with three different women who were all alleged married to him, where it created kind of a dramatic and often heartbreaking love triangle where all three of them were trying to fight over the estate of Frankie Lymon and what little money he did have left. The three women that were fighting over Frankie Lymon's estate that all alleged that they were married to him was Zola Taylor, Elizabeth Waters, and Amira Eagle. But throughout this long court proceedings and hearing the stories about what Frankie Lymon had going on, it did officially come out at the end of this trial that Amira Eagle was Frankie Lymon's legal wife, and she was there with him until he unfortunately passed away. Of course, the movie is a fictionalization of Frankie Lymon and what went on through his life. They did try to capture it, but they did make it entertaining. Frankie Lymon was one of the original singers here in the United States of America that influenced many of artists after. And once people seen Frankie Lymon and the Teenagers blow up in New York City, everyone tried to have a doo-wop group. So Frankie Lymon, the Teenagers, they were pioneers when it came to the doo-wop groups and actually getting together and making it. It's unfortunate what happened to Frankie Lymon. His life was cut short. He was struggling. He wasn't making the money that he was when he was an actual artist, and things happened, and he had that untimely death. I'd like to thank you all for tuning in. That was Frankie Lymon and his movie, Why Do Fools Fall in Love? If there's anyone you want me to try to break down in the month of February, let me know down below. And also, were you a fan of this movie, Why Do Fools Fall in Love? And had you ever heard any of Frankie Lymon's songs prior to the movie dropping? Thanks for watching. I'm MoedotJ. If you like this kind of content, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. Thanks for watching. I'm out.
Jimmy on the beat, boy.